This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Thank you for downloading this podcast of The World at One from BBC Radio 4. Hello and welcome to The World at One with me, Sarah Montague. The war against water and flooding. How do we protect our homes? And do we need to start moving whole communities?
I wouldn't want to live around here. My sister, when she got flooded, she woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning and her bedroom was about 3 foot underwater. We ended up having to cart her out in the middle of the night. So it's not a good situation.
We'll hear about the computer modelling that predicts what will be submerged. If you don't want the UK to leave the EU, how should you vote in the European elections? We'll hear from the Liberal Democrats and Change UK. Danny Baker is fired from the BBC over a tweet.
Well, it was ill-advised, ill-thought out and stupid, but racist? No.
We'll bring you the latest. A new report on fertility shows more single women and same-sex couples are successfully using IVF. And Dave from Chaz and Dave talks to us about that Tottenham win. The BBC News is read by Corrie Caulfield.
The broadcaster Danny Baker has been sacked by the BBC after tweeting a joke about the Duke and Duchess of Sussex's new baby using a picture of a chimpanzee. The presenter was accused of mocking the Duchess's racial heritage in the tweet, which was captioned, "Royal Baby Leaves Hospital." He later described the post as stupid and unthinking, but said BBC management had thrown him under the bus. Our entertainment correspondent, Lizo Mazimba, reports.
Baker has presented a weekly show on BBC Radio 5 Live for the last 10 years. He tweeted the photo of a well-dressed man and woman holding hands with a small chimpanzee in a suit yesterday evening with the caption, "Royal Baby Leaves Hospital." The Duchess of Sussex's mother, the new baby's grandmother, is African-American. Baker later deleted his social media post and apologised, saying that it had never occurred to him that it could have racial connotations. This morning, he said he'd been sacked by the BBC. The BBC said this was a serious error of judgment which goes against the values we as a station aim to embody.
The Church of England has been severely criticised for the way it handled cases of child abuse in the Diocese of Chichester. Over 50 years, 18 people linked to the diocese have been convicted in connection with the scandal, along with the former bishop, Peter Ball. He'd previously received support from a number of high-profile figures, including Prince Charles. The report by the Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Abuse said the apology given by the Church remained unconvincing. From the inquiry, our correspondent Andy Moore.
The inquiry said the response by the Church to what it called appalling allegations was marked by secrecy, prevarication and the avoidance of reporting alleged crimes. The former Archbishop of Canterbury, Lord Carey, came in for particular criticism over his support for the former Bishop Peter Ball, who was jailed in 2015 for a string of sexual assaults against teenagers and young men. The report said Lord Carey's compassion for Ball did not extend to his victims. The actions of Prince Charles were said to be misguided. He wrote a number of letters in support of the bishop before Ball was convicted. In a letter to the inquiry, Prince Charles said he had not intended to influence the course of justice. He also said he felt deep personal regret for trusting Ball.
The Pope has announced new procedures for reporting abuse or violence in the Catholic Church. The guidelines are designed to prevent cases from being covered up. Our correspondent James Reynolds reports from Rome.
The Pope's decree is meant to change the way the Church investigates cases of abuse. For the first time, clerics and other Church officials will be obliged to disclose any allegations they may have heard. Previously, this had been left to each individual's discretion. Reports are expected to be made within 90 days to offices within Church dioceses. The decree also defines the covering up of abuse as a specific category. The Church's senior leaders, its bishops, are specifically included in this. That's because in many documented cases, bishops covered up crimes of priests who reported to them.
The police service of Northern Ireland says it's arrested 4 people in connection with the murder of the journalist Lyra McKee in Londonderry. She was shot dead by the dissident Republican group, the New IRA, during rioting last month. A 15-year-old boy and 3 men aged between 18 and 51 are being questioned under terrorism legislation. Jeremy Corbyn has launched his party's campaign for the European elections, saying Labour has a plan to unite the country and heal divisions caused by Brexit. During a speech in Kent, he defended his current stance on holding another referendum and said the party was trying to offer something for everyone. Our assistant political editor Norman Smith reports.
Mr Corbyn said only Labour could bring the country together by respecting the views of the 17 million who voted for Brexit, while also addressing the fears of Remainers by protecting the economy and leaving open the option of another referendum. Pressed by reporters over whether this wasn't a confusing message, Mr Corbyn said, "I don't think it's confusing at all." Some Labour MPs, however, have warned the party risks satisfying no one and point to the party's poor showing in the local elections as evidence of the dangers of such a stance. Meanwhile, Mr Corbyn also appeared to play down the prospects of a breakthrough in the cross-party talks, insisting they'd proved difficult and there had been no big offer from the government. Remarks which would seem to thwart government hopes of introducing the legislation to implement Mrs May's deal ahead of the European elections. The Labour leader also cautioned voters that a vote for Nigel Farage's Brexit party would be a vote for no deal.
The fiancé of the first person killed in the London Bridge attacks 2 years ago has told the inquest into his death that she'd had premonitions of a terror attack on that day. Christine Delcroix and Xavier Thomas were hit by the attacker's van as they crossed London Bridge to visit the Shard. Mr Thomas's body was recovered from the River Thames 3 days later. The Environment Agency has said at least £1 billion needs to be spent on flood and coastal defences in England every year because of the threat posed by climate change. It's also warned that some communities living in vulnerable areas may even need to move. The government said it would be seeking evidence for its own flood policy later in the year.
Corrie Caulfield, thank you. We can't win a war against water. That's how the chair of the Environment Agency, Emma Howard-Boyd, explained the flooding challenge facing the country. She launched a consultation today on what we all need to do to protect against flooding. With the expected rises in global temperatures, the agency expects more intense bursts of rain and continuing coastal erosion. And Emma Howard-Boyd says that rather than just recreating what was there before, more needs to be done to encourage property owners to rebuild their homes in better locations and to build in a way that protects against flooding by having, for example, plug sockets higher up the wall and putting in hard floors and flood doors. But she also warned that some communities may even need to move because flooding will get so bad. People in Carlisle know all about flooding. Serious floods in 2005 and more recently during Storm Desmond in 2015 led to thousands having to leave their homes. Some homeowners have been left unable to sell their properties. Kaz Graham caught up with John Kelsall. He's chairman of the Carlisle Flood Action Group, and he was sceptical about whether there would be enough money to foot the flood defence bills, which the Environment Agency predicts will hit £1 billion a year.
I would be very surprised if they got £1 billion a year. We've seen very little evidence of that kind of expenditure up to press within the last 3 years.
So where does that leave places like Carlisle?
I think it leaves them asking the question, what does this consultation, where is it leading? What is it wanting to provide? We as a community here in Carlisle are going to be looking very carefully to see whether this is going to improve things here or actually make them worse.
This consultation seems to be suggesting that there are some places that perhaps flooding is always going to be such a high risk that maybe people shouldn't live in those houses anymore. Do you think Carlisle could be one of those places? So some areas of the city, not all of it, obviously.
Yeah, I think that is a fair statement to say for some parts of Carlisle. What you do then is you take on board those areas and you compensate very seriously and properly for those areas if they're going to be in that area. People have already lost equity and they can't sell their houses for the same amount that they purchased them for.
One of the worst affected parts of Carlisle was Warwick Road, which is the main route into the city from the east. It's a pleasant tree-lined route, and a lot of the trees along there have still got blue ribbons about 1.5 meters, 2 metres up them to show how far the flood water got up. So I'm going to head off to Warwick Road and see what people there think.
Every time they rebuild the flood banks, they build them higher, they burst more, and it makes the situation worse. They need to do something else, really.
You haven't lived around here long. Did it not put you off buying a house in this particular area, the fact that it has flooded so much recently?
It did, to be honest. It was more of a reason of work than anything. Other than that, I wouldn't want to live around here. My sister, when she got flooded, she woke up at 3 o'clock in the morning. Her bedroom was about 3 foot underwater.
A bedroom?
Yeah. We ended up having to cart her out in the middle of the night. So it's not a good situation.
Hello, madam. Do you live along here?
Yes, I do.
Can I ask, have you flooded badly in recent years?
Yes.
Twice? Have you had to leave your house then?
Well, just for the one night, then I came back. What they need to do is put bends in rivers like we used to have years and years ago. When I was little, all rivers had bends in them. But now they're straight, so there's nowhere for the water to go until it can get out.
If there are places that flood on a frequent basis like this, and the fact that global warming means there may be more and more frequent big storms, do you think the Environment Agency have got a point? Maybe places like this are always going to flood?
Well, I would think they're probably right. It's fact, and we have to accept that.
That might mean you might have to leave your house, though, I suppose.
No. It's my home.
You're going nowhere.
I'm going nowhere.
Kaz Graham on the situation in the northwest. On the other side of the country in East Anglia, Juliet Blaxland has written a book, The Easternmost House, about what it's like to live on a fast-eroding cliff edge.
We live on really a fast-eroding cliff right at the easternmost edge of England, in East Anglia, at a place called Easton Bavance, which is, it used to be the easternmost parish and the easternmost land point in the whole of the UK. And now that part of the land is about a mile out to sea, and our house gets ever closer. We've lived there for 12 years. A very loose theory is you expect about 1 metre a year to go, and I think it's gone at a more like a rate of 2 metres a year. And some cottages have been demolished because of the erosion, and ours will be sort of next. You have a constant nibbling, and you get used to seeing a sort of jagged edge along the cliff. You get a little bit neurotic about visitors being a bit too gung-ho about going to the edge. But what is interesting is that you have sometimes a complete tidal surge, and then you see really big chunks, or in one case, one night, a dune disappeared. It can be quite dramatic literally the landscape changes, and you sort of become quite used to that in a strange way.
Juliet Blaxland. So what will happen to our coastline? Dr Tamsin Edwards is a climate scientist at King's University London and has modelled what happens as sea levels rise.
It will affect different parts of the UK in different ways. Scotland and the north of the UK and Northern Ireland are still rebounding after the last ice age and the great ice sheets melted away. So the land is rising up, and that helps to protect those areas from sea level rise and slow it down. Now, conversely, like a seesaw, the bottom of the UK, if you like, the south, Wales and England are going down relative to that. So that's making sea level rise worse. The sort of middle to south of Wales, southeast England are places that are a particular concern.
Are we going to see our coastline threatened in a way that it is transformed?
It's always been transformed in the sense that coastal erosion is an ongoing process. But what we have to consider is how can we manage that coastline so that if it changes, it's in a way that we can control and understand and is best for our communities. And that's something that the Environment Agency are very much trying to do. They have these shoreline management plans, which are guidances on where we ought to try and keep the coastline defended with hard hard defences and walls and natural defences, and where actually it's more safe and it's better economically just to actually let the coast inland a bit and to let some of those defences go, but hopefully in a way that's managed, that still provides some protection, provides some control over what happens so that we can plan for the future.
So you mention the southeast. Are there towns, areas that you think will be covered with water?
It's an area where we predict, even under the lowest predictions of sea level rise, the sort of inevitable amounts of sea level rise, if we had a wall that provided protection where you only had a 1% chance of flooding in a year, that would go to more like a 12-13% chance of